This is always a contentious topic because fear is extremely subjective. What terrifies one person may have zero effect on another. And making a public list of movies that have scared you leaves you open to the judgment of others, which is never comfortable. I mean, no one wants to be called a for being afraid of something that others aren't. Frankly, I've seen too many lists lately of the scariest movies of all time that I don't believe have anything to do with actual scariness. The lists are composed either entirely of still recent and very trendy movies, or they're a who's who of cliched old classics that have lost most of their punch. Seriously, Bride of Frankenstein? It's a fantastic movie, but that should not be keeping you up at night.
I've coughed up scarier stuff than that.
In either case, those lists just come across as an excuse for the presenter to show off what wonderful taste they think they have in movies. Well, my list isn't trendy, and it will almost certainly not be popular, but I'm putting it out there anyway because I feel it needs to be said. So, without further ado, here is my list of movies that I think are actually scary. Before we dive in, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about my criteria. I chose movies that personally scared me in some way, and that I think would have the power to scare most other people. I say this because, for example, some people are deathly afraid of, like, clowns. But they don't really have that strong an effect on most people, so scary clown movies are really only scary to a certain percentage of the population. And although several of the movies that I chose are quite gory, I chose movies where the gore is secondary to the actually frightening aspects of the movie, not just gratuitous gore for gore's sake. Also, despite what I said about older movies not being as scary because they've lost most of their punch, I have to preemptively admit that most of the movies on my list are from the 1970s and 80s. But if you hear me out, I think you'll understand why, even if you don't necessarily agree. Now, all that being said, I'm willing to admit that what makes most of these movies so personally scary to me may not apply to others who have not had the same life experiences that I've had, but that can't really be helped. We all have our biases, quirks, and bugbears. Yes, I said bugbears. So let's get started, but be warned, there'll be spoilers ahead. We're gonna kick things off with 1987's Hellraiser. I can already hear some of you rolling your eyes. And I get it, I really do. Rewatching Hellraiser today is still fun, but the plot has become pretty well known, and familiarity has desensitized us to how disturbing this movie actually is. You see, these creatures, called the Cenobites, promise unimaginable pleasure, but in reality, they cause eternal torment. Well, so what, right? They lied. But no, they didn't. They were all seekers after pleasure themselves, but have become so jaded and desensitized that they can no longer tell the difference between pleasure and pain, just as long as they feel something. Kind of a meta-realistic description of jaded horror fans watching this movie, wouldn't you say? And the character of Pinhead is, in many ways, an atypical horror movie villain compared to ones like Jason Voorhees or Michael Myers, in that he is coldly, utterly rational about his actions, but has absolutely no sympathy, no empathy, and no remorse. It almost feels like he could be reasoned with, but he is, for all intents and purposes, a religious zealot who will see no point of view other than his own. But philosophical debates aside, step out of your bubble of complacency and really look at the makeup, the set designs, the special effects. This is some deeply disturbing stuff. If this face didn't haunt your nightmares at least once the first time you saw this movie, well, I don't know what to say. 1979's Alien is another movie that some of you may scoff at, or you just apostrophize it as being science fiction and not true horror. Well, to that I say, you're not wrong, and yet you could not be more wrong. This movie is viscerally terrifying on so many levels, and it plays on that ruthlessly. To start with, there's the claustrophobic nature of the ship and the fear of being hunted by a vicious predator, both of which are pretty scary on their own. But what elevates this movie above others of its kind is the nature of the xenomorphs themselves, particularly their life cycle. This movie is an allegory for rape. There's no way around that. The facehugger form of the alien violates its host in an absolutely horrifying way. Now that should strike a nerve deep within all of us. Getting killed is bad. Getting raped and killed is much, much worse. Getting face raped to death by a giant spider-like crustacean? Just the thought of it should make you panic if you really stopped and thought about it. But don't. It's not the sort of thing people should dwell on. The Mist is probably the most polarizing film on my list, but I stand by it, and I'll tell you why. There is some pretty creepy stuff throughout the movie. The creature designs are a little odd, especially the faces, which I think were intended to be a blend of human and monstrous features, but just kind of ended up looking a little goofy, and reminded me a lot of the old Outer Limits episode, The Xanti Misfits.
Get off!
But apart from that, these are actually some pretty good examples of movie monsters. It also doesn't hurt that you never get a really good look at most of them because they're obscured by the titular mist, and the unseen is, as many people have said, more scary than what you can actually see. And apart from the actual monsters, that religious nut in the store is just about as scary and as monstrous as the creatures lurking outside, and represents a much more immediate and realistic danger to the protagonists. But all of that is pretty pedestrian, really. I mean, it's nothing that hasn't been done in hundreds of other horror movies before it. So what sets this film apart? Well, for me, it is that one perfect moment in the ending. The ending that half the audience loved and the other half absolutely hated. But even if you don't have kids of your own, try and put yourself in this guy's shoes for just a few seconds. That unspeakable choice he has to make to keep a promise to his son and hopefully spare him from a long, painful, and gruesome death at the hands of an inhuman monster. The realization of what he's done, the repeated failed attempts to end his own pain, and then the shocking revelation that it was all for nothing. Worse than nothing, it was totally unnecessary, and now he has to live with that. The first time I saw it, it shocked me. It left me breathless, and that was years before I had a son of my own. That is why this movie will always have a place on my scariest movies list. You're just kind of going along, enjoying the ride, not realizing how badly this movie is going to wreck you at the end. Even though these two aren't from the same franchise, I kind of wanted to discuss them together because they're both from the same era, and they're both scary for the same reasons. I couldn't decide which one of these was a better example of the exploitation/torture porn genre, so I decided, what the heck, let's just lump them in together. Part of the real underlying terror of these movies is that the antagonists aren't supernatural or alien monsters of any sort. Despite their obvious physical and mental illnesses, these are monsters of a very human variety, and oftentimes that's scarier than any supernatural being could be, whether it's demon, alien, interdimensional, or walking dead.
Sometimes that is better.
Pipe down, Judd. We're getting to you. But he's right. In my opinion, movies that center around humans committing atrocities like this have a slight edge in the horror department because they could actually happen. These situations are a lot more plausible and immediate because crazy people are definitely out there.
Whatever.
Oh, you think that's a little far-fetched? Well, while neither of these movies can claim to be true stories, they were both at least partially inspired by real-life events. The serial killer Ed Gein in the case of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and the story of the cannibalistic Sawney Bean clan in the case of The Hills Have Eyes. Both movies stick to some common themes and tropes: ambush, torture, mutilation, cannibalism, sexual deviancy, and the perversion of our notions of family. That last one tends to hit people in a profoundly psychological way, because the family is typically one of the most wholesome images in any culture, but these families take that to a horribly dark extreme. And if 1970s movies don't do it for you, both of these movies were remade in the 2000s. The special effects are better, and the movies are faster paced, which may make them a little more appealing to younger horror buffs. The gore is more realistic, and there's a lot more of it in both films. Although, like most critics, I'd argue that the remakes have lost a lot of the tension that made the originals genuinely scary, as opposed to just morbidly disgusting. Plus, the protagonists in the remakes just seem so much more irritating and stupid.
It's like those people who go camping in millions of films. Let's go camping in the forest of death and blood. Whoa, 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 whoa. Forest of death and blood. Is there a story behind that name of the forest? Well, why, yes. Everyone who goes there dies of death and blood.
You don't empathize with them at all. You're just looking forward to seeing how they die. And while that can be entertaining, it's just not good filmmaking. This is it. Pet Sematary is the one that did it for me. This is the one horror movie that I just can't bring myself to watch again. And I'm actually kind of pissed at myself now for including it, because now I have to include clips from it in order to remain consistent. Now don't get me wrong, there are other horror movies I never want to watch again, either because they're unpleasantly gross, uncomfortably disturbing, or they just plain sucked. But Pet Sematary is none of these. It just genuinely scared the crap out of me. I have a soft spot for children and animals, so a movie that largely centers around the tragic deaths of a beloved house cat and an innocent toddler, only to see said cat and toddler be reanimated into bloodthirsty monsters, is automatically gonna push a few of my buttons. Add to that the quick glimpse of cannibalism and that age-old fear of monsters under the bed, and the scary scenes are really starting to pile up into one uncomfortable experience. And then you get Zelda. Not just for what she represents, which is guilt and the innate fear of illness and deformity that all people have to some extent, but seriously, just look at the character. This is nightmare fuel. Like I said before, this movie is genuinely frightening. Now, I probably made a mistake trying to watch it when I was like 11 years old and it's left me psychologically scarred, but even now as an adult, I still feel like this is a movie that has the power to actually scare you. Alright, there it is. I've put it all on the line for you, so go ahead, let me have it. I have been outspoken on this subject on other people's videos, so now it's my turn.
Karma's a bitch.
I'm actually looking forward to hearing about what movies scared you and why, so join the conversation in the comments section. And two things you shouldn't be afraid of are those like and subscribe buttons. And let's keep the comments civil, please. I'm all for discussing the problems and the merits of each of these movies, but people are starting to take these things way too seriously. Let's try and remember that horror movies are supposed to be fun, right? If you didn't find any of the movies on this list to be particularly scary, well, bully for you, I guess? Send me your address and I'll send you a medal telling you how proud I am of you.
Oh, by the way, I was being sarcastic.
Well, about the being proud of you part. Not necessarily about the medal. I might actually do that if anyone writes in. Anyway, as always, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.